This presentation is being recorded, so anybody who did register and wasn't able to log on for the live event, or if you would like to go back and revisit this presentation after this afternoon, you'll find a link to the event recording will be sent to you, and then down here is the URL to where we archive all of our webinar videos, so you'll have a chance to view this afterwards as well. And at this time, I would like to introduce our guest presenter today, Kimberly Carper. Kimberly brings over 20 years of human resource management experience from Expedia, Hyatt Hotels, and Washington Mutual. She guest lectures for multiple colleges at WSU and has been an adjunct faculty member in the Carson College of Business. During her career, Kimberly has partnered with CEOs to build and sustain their organizations, created a leadership development team for Washington Mutual from the ground up, and worked with hundreds of individuals as they've negotiated job transitions. Currently, Kimberly owns KCHR Consulting, providing a full range of customized consulting services for individuals looking for assistance with job searches, career strategies, interviewing coaching, and salary negotiations. She also contracts to the City of Pullman hiring for the police and fire departments. And we are just so pleased to have Kimberly here with us today and are really excited to hear what she has to share with us. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn everything over to Kimberly.
All right, sounds good. Give me a second here and I will share my screen, which is looking really weird right now with my Zoom, but we'll get there in a second. So, okay. Can everybody see that okay or not yet? I'm not sure that's shared. Okay, hold on one sec. I don't know why it did not. Oh, I see. There we go. There we go. All right, looking good? Thumbs up, Carrie, we're good? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Sylvia. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining today. Really excited to talk with you about networking virtually. I'm a huge fan of networking, and we'll talk about that, but you know, a lot of networking is done in person, and obviously, like with everything else, we've had to pivot this year. And so really talking about how do you still maintain those connections? What are some things you have to think about when networking virtually, and how do you keep that going? Because honestly, I think a lot of things that we've seen happen in 2020, not the pandemic per se will continue, but I think other things are going to continue in terms of a lot of people realizing how easily it is to connect virtually. We've heard a lot of talk about people not necessarily going back into offices. A lot of companies that are thinking, well, why are we paying this type of rent? And so I think that this is something we'll see more and more often. And so it's not just applicable to in the midst of a pandemic. I can kind of skip this slide, although Carrie, thank you. You said 20 years. I think unfortunately now it's been over 25. But some of the work that I have done in my past. But let's go ahead and jump into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start by talking about the importance of networking. We're going to talk about how do you network virtually, what's different, and then talk about tips on virtual connections in general. So those tips can be everything from when we are networking virtually, and that's what the focus will be. But for those of you who are doing things like job searches right now and you have interviews, I think a lot of the tips are really applicable for interviews and all of those types of things as well. As Carrie said, she's going to be keeping for me an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions along the way, she'll just interrupt me and I'm completely okay with that. Happy to answer a question. If it's something I'm getting to later, I'll let you know. Okay? So to get started, what is networking? This part's fairly simple. Basically, networking is an information exchange between you and another person, right? It's one of the things we have to think about is networking is really about building relationships, but it's also about maintaining them. A lot of times we make connections and we think, okay, great, we've made that connection. And then it sort of fades away. Maybe we'll go back to it later, maybe we won't. But maintaining connections is really critical because you just don't know exactly when you're going to need them. And I think the other thing that's really important to think about is networking is a two-way street, right? It's about giving as much as it is about taking, because it's of mutual benefit to the individuals involved. The other thing that I think, you have to be honest about, it can really be intimidating. And so that is for anybody, no matter how extroverted you may be, no matter how much you like meeting people. I think one of the things I've learned about myself during the pandemic is I'm maybe not quite as extroverted as I always thought I was. I don't need to be around people all the time, but I'm usually pretty comfortable networking with people or talking with people. But depending on the situation or who I'm reaching out to, I can find it intimidating as well. And that's just a fact. And so if it makes you nervous, you are not alone. You are probably pretty much like almost everybody else out there. And that doesn't mean that you don't want to take advantage of the benefits of networking. So why do you want to bother doing this in the first place? So honestly, networking is going to be one of the most important tools that you're going to use in your personal and in your professional life. It is truly the best way to find a job. And we're going to look at some statistics in just a second. But there are so many jobs out there that are not even advertised that people get hired for because of networking. And then when you have a job, learning more about an industry, maybe, you have a job. For myself, for example, I'm in human resources, right? So Hyatt Hotels is where I really started in human resources. I switched from there to banking. Learning about that industry is really important as you make changes or wanting to learn about different areas. To get inside information, what's about to happen in a company. Is this a place I may or may not want to be? Or if I'm in sales, hey, what's about to happen there? So networking, you can get inside information, learn about potential clients, sales opportunities, and just gaining additional contacts. Here's the statistics I was just talking about. The power of networking when looking for a job. 1 out of 152 people who just apply for a job are hired. 1 out of 72 who are sourced, meaning they were plucked, people were looking for them, get hired. 1 out of 22 who are presented by an agency, so that's like a headhunter or a staffing agency, are hired, and 1 out of 16 who are referred are hired. Right? So if you look at that and you say, okay, I've been throwing my resume out there, I'm applying all over the place, and I hear this all the time with my clients. I'm getting nothing. As a matter of fact, within 24 hours, I'm getting that like standard, sorry, thank you so much response. But if you think about it, 1 out of 16 who are referred are hired. That's where networking comes in. People want to hire people they know, or they want to hire somebody that somebody else knows and recommends. So it's really, really critical. My recommendation would be that anytime that you're applying for a job, if you can find a connection within that company who can be your advocate, or who at least maybe can pass on your resume as well, it's really, really important. So that should always be a goal. So making connections, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I know we hate talking about that, because here we are, we went to this amazing school, we've got this amazing degree, we've learned all these great things, but unfortunately there's a lot of other people out there like that. And so it's really who you know in terms of those connections that we're talking about. So could you briefly just take a second, and Carrie, if you could read them out to me a little bit. What are some ways that people connect today? If you could type that into the chat, just some ways that you think about in terms of how people connect today.
One response, social media, similar interests, social media engagement, instant messaging at work, LinkedIn,
Yeah.
volunteering,
Yeah.
introduction through coworkers or friends, gym or athletic club,
Yep.
mail, meetup groups.
Okay, great. All right.
And yeah, and more social media.
Okay. So one of the ones that's popping up a lot is social media, which is good because we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of those other ways as well. I heard in their gyms, okay, maybe not right now if you're in Washington, because I think we just closed those all down, but there are so many different ways that we do connect. Introductions from friends, you guys said, meetups, social media, as we talked about, came up quite a bit. And someone did specifically, at least one person specifically mentioned LinkedIn. And I think it's really important to understand the power of LinkedIn. And so we're going to spend some time talking about it because it is such a key virtual networking tool. I cannot stress it highly enough. And so we're going to talk about the others as well, but I'd like to take just a few moments to talk about LinkedIn and give some tips. I want to be really clear that what we're talking about in these next few minutes on LinkedIn, I can do an entire seminar on LinkedIn with no problem at all, but just some key things to think about. So let's talk about LinkedIn before we go into some of the other ways that we connect. So you guys talked about LinkedIn, networking online. Facebook actually is still a huge way that people connect. I wonder what will happen over the next few years as sort of Facebook is falling out of favor, but it is still a big way that people connect, even for professional reasons. And then online activities and interests. So those things that you guys were talking about, like volunteering or things, you can still make those types of connections through online activities or interests that you may have. Groups you may be in, you're someone who plays chess. So maybe you're in, a chess group and you make connections through there, or you do animal rescue, but you can't really do it right now, but there's so many different groups that you can find where you can make those connections. So really important to think about different ways to network online. In talking about LinkedIn specifically, it has become so huge that we have gotten to a point where if you do not have a LinkedIn profile, people kind of question it, which is interesting. And I remember I was probably one of the very first, I was on LinkedIn when it was a beta. I had an individual who sent it to me and I was like, what is this thing? But I trusted him and decided to go on it. And there weren't that many people on at the time. Now, obviously, there are so many. And like I said, as a recruiter, if someone looks at it and they think, well, they're going to originally, the first thing they're going to do is go to your LinkedIn profile. Be aware, we go to social media, any kind of social media, like we will Google you. So you do want to make sure, excuse me, that all of your social media is something that you would want basically your grandmother to see. Excuse me, but having a LinkedIn profile is critical. The thing to remember is it's not just your resume. There's a lot in there that completely mirrors your resume, but it is a chance to show your personality. And we'll look at a couple of quick ways that you can do that. It's basically the equivalent of a digital elevator speech. So meaning, who am I? What am I about? And what do I do? That's an elevator speech. And again, that's a whole nother topic as well. But it's your digital elevator speech. It encapsulates who you are, but beyond just a resume, because it doesn't just have to be 100% work related. And we'll talk about that. It sounds weird because it's a business professional network, but there's some ways that you throw in some things about yourself as well. And having a professional photo on there is really key, which I have always found fascinating because in the United States, if you put a photo on a resume, like we're going to be like, no, thank you. We don't even want to see that. But then we go look at the LinkedIn profiles anyway. And if you don't have a photo, we think it's weird. I haven't figured out the sociological things behind all of those pieces yet, but it's very true. So you do need to have a professional photo. So it's going to be a photo. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go pay for a huge headshot or anything, but it's not, your sister's bachelorette party where you crop everybody else out and there's just you. So you want it to be a professional looking photo. If you have a background in it that is appropriate for your workplace, so like my husband, for example, has his own company. He's an electrical engineer, and they work with relays, like what Schweitzer, for those of you who are in Pullman or have been in Pullman, like what Schweitzer Engineering does. And I actually think his profile now has a bunch of those relays behind him, but it's a professional photo, and that's completely okay. Or if you're in the medical field and you're wearing your lab coat, that's completely okay. But otherwise, you want it just crisp and clean without anything else that detracts from the photo. You're going to have a strong headline and a strong about section. I'm going to show you that in just a second. Those are places where we get to show some of our personality. We're also going to have our top 3 to 5 strengths kind of everywhere throughout. So you're going to have some of those maybe in your headline or in your about section. There's a skills section, or maybe where people have recommended you. That's that keyword piece where recruiters are going to search by keyword. And so you want to have those words in there. You want to make it detailed, so your jobs are going to have bullets underneath them. It doesn't have to be maybe every bullet that you have on your resume, but your job should have some bullets. And somewhere you want to list your specialties. That goes back to that top 3 to 5 strengths, your skills. And I'll show you a couple different ways that you can put in specialties. You can put them in your skills section, but there's some other places to put them as well. A really quick look here. Sorry, it's kind of widened because my about section is long. But as you can see here, the headline, just kind of what types of things you would want here. Human resources coach, motivator, presenter. I probably want to update that at some point. I just haven't recently, but some keywords here. And then this is your about section. And here's what I mean by showing your personality. If you take a look at my first paragraph here, you get a pretty big feel for who I am, right? It doesn't say, you know, compensation expert, you know, organizational development. It doesn't say that. It talks about who I am as a person. And then I kind of talk here about the things that I have done, right? So some of these things are the professional pieces. So the on-call HR person, the crafting people's resumes, those types of things, go Cougs, all of that. But then you also see, you know, we took 4.5 months off to travel Europe. Things that I enjoy doing. And that's where you get to show a little bit more about you, because you never know, again, these virtual connections, what is someone going to see and glom onto, right? So for me, I've definitely had people ask about, like, how the heck did you do 4.5 months in Europe? How'd you get time off to do that? So you never know. So you can put some things in there. At this point, I have my specialties built in at the bottom, and a lot of people do this where you just list out your specialties. That's still going to be pieces in my skills section, right? So if you think about my top skills, I'm in human resources. You see it up here in my headline. You see specifics about it here. You'll see specifics throughout here, keywords, and you're going to see them in my skills section as well. So that's important to keep in mind. I want to show you the ways that a couple other people have done it as well. There's lots of great examples out there. These are just a couple that I really like. So this is one I've been using for years because I think he's super fun. He also puts his specialties down at the bottom. However, one thing I want to point out is you see things like, I don't care who gets credit, I just want to win. That's, I'm a team player, but they're just saying it differently, right? So it's creative. I'm the calm one. I run towards fires. Crisis management, right? This is the person who stays calm in a crisis. So a different way to kind of look and put things in to show a little bit about your personality. One other quick one. I like this one. It talks about when I was 21, I climbed Mount Everest. What does that have to do with a job? But that's the first thing, right? And it grabs you. And he talks here, he doesn't have that specialty section, but look at here. I'm well-versed in negotiations, planning and development, relationship management. So he's got those specialties in there as well. And then I love how in the end, if you're interested in grabbing coffee, I mean, maybe not right now, but if you're interested in grabbing coffee or talking shop, or to hear how I almost fell off a mountain at 27,000 feet, right? Again, I like this guy. This guy's interesting. I'd want to talk to him. So a little bit of how you can put a little bit of a different personality twist into that about section and how people actually expect that right now. A couple other quick statistics that I think are important to keep in mind. 2 professionals join LinkedIn every second, 62 million users added in every year. These statistics are actually updated as of October of this year. 171 million American workers have profiles. So you can understand why it starts to look a little bit strange if you don't. And there's 3 million jobs in the United States posted every month. So those are important things to know. A couple other quick statistics. You can always look in LinkedIn. They kind of rank your profile based on how many connections you have, what sections you've filled out. But what we do know is if you're ranked as intermediate, you're 8 times more likely to get noticed, 10 times more likely to get contacted, and all-star is 40 times more likely to be found in recruiter searches. A lot of that has to do with those keywords that we mentioned earlier. And that profile piece, right? Photos, 21 times more views and 36 times more messages. Luckily, in the world of LinkedIn, the messages are generally pretty appropriate. So again, but photos, because people believe that there's actually someone behind the profile as opposed to maybe being a fake profile. So we're talking about connecting now. And so let's look at how do you connect on LinkedIn. Keep in mind, there's 3 different types of connections. There's a first connection, so I know you directly. A second connection, you're my friend of a friend. And a third, you're a friend of a friend of a friend. So who do you connect with? That's up to you. I don't recommend connecting with everybody under the sun, because for me specifically, I am less likely to connect with you if I don't know exactly what our connection is and I see that you have tons of connections. Now the reality is it stops at 500, I think, is when you just look at it and it'll say 500 plus connections. I have over 500 connections, so I don't fault that at all. But if I look at you and you're connected to, you know, Barack Obama and Bill Gates and who knows who else, I have to wonder how solid those connections are. So I don't recommend connecting everywhere, but I do recommend making a lot of connections. Use your network, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about that network, but use your network. Connect with people you know that you've worked with or went to school with. Use your email address contacts. You can let LinkedIn search your email addresses and they will recommend for you. They'll always do a people you might know. You can also search by companies and industries and schools. If you are not connecting with Cougs, you are missing out on a huge, huge opportunity, right? So you should be doing searches by WSU and people that may be in companies you're interested in, because the reality is that Cougs helping Cougs, it is a thing. And I guarantee it is not a thing for every school. So feel free to search if you're looking for companies. You might search by a company and say, okay, well, I'm looking at REI. Oh wait, he went to Wazoo. Connect then. Let them know, hey, wanted to connect with a fellow Coug. Most likely you're going to get someone who will want to connect with you. You can't customize your invitation where it just said, hey, you know, wanted to connect with a fellow Coug. That's where you do it. People are more likely to accept invitations that include a personal note. I have to be a little more careful because I'm a consultant, so every invitation could be some business for me. And so I do tend to accept more, but there are definitely some I do not. If you wanted to look me up and if you wanted to connect with me after this, just say, hey, I attended your presentation through the Alumni Center today. I'd love to connect. Absolutely happy to do so, but it really helps me when I know, you know, why you're trying to connect with me. And honestly, if you're a Coug, I'm always going to say yes. So tips, you want to join groups when you're on LinkedIn. That's part of expanding your network. You need to join the WSU alum group. Like, there's just no question. There's no reason you should not be part of that group. So you need to join the alum group. There are so many ways to make connections within there, especially because, you know, we're not all over the country doing our tailgating and everything right now. It's just not happening. And so it's really critical that you're connecting with people from WSU. You can connect with past employer groups. I have a group that I'm connected with that we still talk, that the company ceased to exist, I think, in 2000. And it's not Washington Mutual, it's a different one. I don't only work for companies that cease to exist, but sometimes that happens. So, but we still connect with each other, and we've all gone on to do interesting, cool things and help each other out. You can help people. Remember, we talked about networking is a two-way street. And so providing recommendations for people if you've worked with them, or endorsing their skills, you can do that. And that's also, they're more likely to want to reciprocate if you're doing things for them as well. If you're actively looking for a job, you can look at the job boards. there's a job board on LinkedIn. Remember we said 3 million, I think it was 3 million jobs per month are posted in the United States. So you can set preferences to have them tell you about jobs about by location or company size or industry. So I recommend you do that as well. If you are looking for a job, please do not put seeking new opportunity in the headline. You don't want to do, they also offer like a thing now that says like looking, like hashtag looking for work. You don't actually want to be advertising that. You don't want to say not employed or job hunting. Just put your skills up there, right? What's your background? Project management, hospitality, whatever it might be. That's what your headlines is looking like. And when your LinkedIn profile is where you want it to be, so you feel confident in it, it should be on your resume and it should be a clickable link. So you do want to include that on your resume, simply because of the fact that so many of us have similar names. I was on early enough that I can just use my name as is, but there's so many of us that have, you know, the same name as somebody else, and then you might have a bunch of numbers after it or whatever. It's easier to have it really accessible for the recruiter. So now we've talked about one of the really strong key ways to connect with people virtually, but that's not the only way. So what's next, and how are you going to be building this network? I want you to keep in mind that you know more people than you think. So what I always recommend to my clients is when you're starting to think about who am I going to connect with for my network, set aside 15 minutes uninterrupted and take a piece of paper or type it on the computer, whatever you want to do, and just start putting out the names of people that you know that you might want to connect with. So when you do that, I highly recommend you think about, you know, past employers, past coworkers, past, you know, alumni, you know, fellow alumni. What affinity groups? Were you part of the Greek system? Were you part of another group within the university? What about like your neighbors growing up? Do they have people? Are there connections from your hometown? Are there family members you might want to connect with? It's just a brain dump. And then once you've done that, I recommend that you really sit down and set some goals. Who are you going to connect with? Who's most important? Well, I've got my list. Let me see. Are some of these people on LinkedIn? Are some of these people I just need to reach out to because I just want to talk to them anyway? And then we'll see how it goes, because again, you're building a relationship. It's not this immediate thing necessarily. So sometimes it's reconnecting with people. And then I usually say, set a goal. I'm going to reach out to 10 people this week. I'm going to reach out to 5, whatever's realistic, but you want to build your network. What I often see, like for example, with LinkedIn, is somebody will come to me, they haven't done much with it, and they've got 24 connections. That's not really going to get you anywhere. But if you sit down and really think about how many people do I want to connect with and how I'm going to go ahead and pursue this, you're going to be up to a couple hundred pretty quickly. And the key thing about LinkedIn, we talked about that first, second, and third connection, is it may be that I'm connected to Carrie. And when I go to look, because I'm really, really interested in, I don't know, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but I don't know anybody there. But when I search, Carrie knows somebody there. So that's a second connection. So my connection with Carrie, maybe she'll introduce me to that individual. And so that's why it's important to get as many people out there, because you never know where that connection is going to be. That's going to be a super important one for you. Again, think about organizations. You guys mentioned this too as we were, when we were sharing. The alumni network I talked about, like you need to be part of the alumni network. There's just no question about it in my mind. Any kinds of professional groups. So for me, there's the Society of Human Resources Management. There's project management groups. There's supply management groups, all different types of industry groups and professional groups that you may want to connect with. And you guys mentioned volunteer work. And that is also super important. So considering the organizations, whether you volunteer now, maybe you want to start volunteering, there's still lots of opportunities to volunteer, even in 2020. And so how might you be able to connect to other people through volunteer work? Because you already have an affinity for the same types of things at that point, which really can help to build those connections. So you're building your list, but then the question is like, why am I building this list? What am I going to do with it? Well, there's a couple of different things. One, we talked about the fact that when you are applying to a job, it is always, always helpful if you know someone within the company. And my recommendation is always, before you even apply, to let the person know, hey, I'm going to be applying. I'd love to send you over my resume if you happen to have someone you can pass it on to, and I'll be applying through the website. But you want to give them a heads up beforehand. I have a friend at pretty high up in Amazon, and he was expressing a ton of frustration because Amazon, like a lot of companies, uses what's called an ATS, an applicant tracking system. And it goes by keywords, and you get ranked, and you can get tossed out pretty quickly. And his point was, so many times people contact me and say, I applied for this job, and he'll go into the system and they've already been kicked out, and at that point he can't do anything. So you want to make those connections first, right? Via email and or a LinkedIn message, and see if there's someone they would be willing to pass you on to, or at least giving them a heads up, because potentially they can help you with that. The next thing I would say in connecting virtually is the informational interview, which I am a huge, huge fan of. So anyone who's ever been to talks where I've talked about informational interviews, they are so important, and they can happen in the virtual world, honestly, just as easily as they can happen in person. Ideally, we want to be in person, but like, you know, who's going to say, oh, sure, yeah, I'll go out with you. I don't know you that well. Let's go out for a cup of coffee. Not necessarily right now, but virtually, absolutely. So informational interviews are really important because they give you an opportunity to learn about an industry, to learn about a career, or to learn about a specific company. But what they also do is they allow you to make that connection that we've talked about, right? So Carrie knows this, but I am a huge fan of informational interviews because every job I've ever had in my life came because of an informational interview. That includes Expedia. That includes my adjunct faculty work at WSU. It all came from informational interviews. I moved to Seattle knowing my now husband and one other individual. I knew nobody else in the city. And it was through informational interviews that I made connections and got my first job. So it's really, I really think they're super important. And the thing is, maybe it's not because that's who you're going to get the job with, but it's then a connection that goes beyond just that LinkedIn connection, right? So they're super important to make those connections for you to learn things and for you to help start building those relationships. So who should you contact? Well, we just made that list, right? We made a list of these people because we were setting goals. Those are people you can contact for informational interviews. They might be people that you want to learn about their career, right? Maybe you're switching jobs, or maybe you're just getting into your career. It might be the industry, like, oh man, you know, I love the cruise line industry. I'm not so sure that's what I want to go into right now. Maybe I should talk to somebody who's in it and see what things are looking like. Or it might be a specific organization, right? So I am really interested in Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, but I know nothing really about how they operate. So I've just seen them in the news a bunch. I'd like to talk to someone specifically within the organization. So those, depending on what you're looking for, is going to dictate who you reach out to, right? So in my case, am I reaching out to somebody in human resources, a career contact? Am I reaching out to somebody in the industry? I want to go into manufacturing. I don't think that one would ever work for me, but maybe. So maybe I want to learn more about manufacturing or a specific organization, right? I've done that here in Pullman. So I do live in Pullman now. I've done that here in Pullman, like Pullman Regional Hospital, wanted to learn more about their human resources department and how that works. So contacting individuals there. So you reach out and you explain your purpose. You're going to want to use email or LinkedIn messaging, right? And basically you're telling them you want to learn from their experiences, right? Some people say, I want to pick your brain. Carrie, did you have a question? It looks like you unmuted.
Yeah, was actually wondering, do you have a recommendation on how often we should kind of go through and try to make new connections on LinkedIn? Is it mostly centered around job searches, or should we kind of try to do it more periodically if we aren't changing careers too
I
often?
would say you want to go ahead and do it. I would do kind of a health checkup once a month. Just sort of say, maybe monthly, saying, is there, who should I be connecting with? Who's new? I will get invites, and then I'll go through and I'll look at the suggestions that they make, because they'll always say people you might know, and I'll go through those. So I would say I'm probably making new connections a couple times a month at least. I would not wait until you're looking for a job, because then you're more in a panic situation. So you want to be constantly building your network. So great question. And as I mentioned before, it's building your network and maintaining your network. So it is reposting articles that people have posted on LinkedIn. It's sending a message to somebody, if it's, on Facebook or through Instagram or whatever, all the ways that we connect virtually right now, but just staying in contact. It's wishing them happy birthday or happy work anniversary, just kind of making sure that you keep in contact. One thing that I think is really important that I love to do is, if you see an article that someone would really appreciate, sending that over to them. Hey, I read this today. I was really thinking about you based on this conversation we had. That's a great way for people to know, and to keep you in front of mind as well. And then follow their lead. And I put location in here simply because, right now in 2020, the location is going to be virtual. I think that that's really important to keep in mind, is that that's what you should be recommending. Even if you're someone who is comfortable going somewhere and meeting someone, that should be your first recommendation, because you don't know how the person on the other end feels. But in other times, maybe you are, inviting someone for a cup of coffee. You offer to pay usually, if that's the case. I recommend that. But right now it's, I would love to, ideally, you would love it to be a video call as opposed to a phone call, okay? But if they just say, I can do a quick phone call, I'd rather not do Zoom, I've got Zoom fatigue, that's okay. But ideally at this point, you want to do a video call with them. But follow their lead in terms of whether they want video or phone, and the time frame. Usually I would say it's like 15 to 30 minutes. So I usually say, I wonder if we could grab 20 minutes, not more than a half hour. You do not want to recommend more than a half hour. And then you really need to do your homework. So you need to research the individual, research the company, and prepare questions. So you want to have a set of questions that you're going to be asking, so that you're not just kind of coming there without knowing your purpose. There are lots of questions. You can Google informational interviews, and there's lots of questions. They should be specific to what you're looking for, if it's about their career or their company. Then there comes the piece of, let's assume that we're doing this on, it's going to be virtual. And so what makes virtual networking unique? There's 3 things you need to think about. And I'm going to go under the assumption that we're going to do this as a Zoom call. There's the technology, there's the look, and there's the location. So location actually does come up, even though not in the way maybe we were thinking about before. So taking a quick look, technology. Do a practice run. You want to keep in mind that even if it's not because you're looking for a job, you're still making an impression on this person, right? So you want to make a solid impression, because we want a connection that's going to continue. And so do a quick practice run, test out your technology. I'll be honest, although it's not looking great right now because the light changed, I actually, even though I do Zoom calls every day, all day, I made my daughter Zoom with me this morning. I was like, okay, how's everything looking today? And so do a practice run. Check your name, right? So whether, up here I've got Kimberly Carper. I actually had someone who wanted to do an informational interview with me. And when she logged on, her name was Princess Fire something, I don't know. And I was just like, again, it's about an impression, right? Like, could you change that? Did you need to be Princess Firewater or whatever you were? So again, keeping that in mind. Make sure your device is fully charged. Nothing like, asking someone a question and then cutting out because your device died. Keep other tabs closed. Make sure your phone, if you're doing it on a computer and you have a phone nearby, that it's in silent mode so that you don't get disturbed during that. So you want to test out your technology. The look is also really important, the lighting, right? Ideally, you're in front of a window. And lighting from above or the back does cast shadows because it's kind of wintry now over here in Pullman. It's gray. You know, I do keep an overhead light on. I don't always, but I'll tell you a little secret. When I'm doing Zoom calls where I'm presenting, I actually switch out my light bulbs. So I have normally kind of a soft light in here so that it's not too harsh. And I switch it out to brighter lights because I tend to look yellow, really yellow otherwise. So again, ideally lighting in the front and if you're going to have overhead lights, knowing what kind of, if it casts a shadow or what that might look like. If you're going to add a lamp, it is best to do that from behind your computer. Again, adding that light, especially if you don't have a window, but that front lighting is definitely best. So checking that out. And why do we care? If it's just, you know, we're just connecting with this person to learn things, everything you do sets an impression. And what you want to have happen is that the look doesn't mean anything. I see you, I see your background, I see what I'm looking at, and then I don't even think twice about it. It just doesn't detract from our conversation and we can have a conversation. It's kind of like that interview that when they take you out to dinner and it's like, don't order spaghetti, right? Because then the only thing you're thinking, you know, people are thinking about is, you know, man, she's really eating that in a weird way. So, and just kind of, you don't want any of that to be distraction. Again, with the look, the camera angle is really important. You don't want it too high. You don't want it too low. You should be looking maybe slightly up. It's kind of a 1/3 rule where if I could take my screen and I could kind of cut it into thirds, put a line and then put a line, ideally my eyes are going to be right around my second line, right? So there's a little room above the top, but ideally, you know, Carrie looks perfect. She's set perfectly in terms of where your eyes are going to be. And, you want to be looking, and I might talk about this later, I can't remember, but you want to be looking at the camera as much as you can, because you can see when I'm looking and doing things like this, if I'm reading my questions versus if I'm looking at you, it looks really different. So as much as you can, you want to look into the camera. So it's like I'm looking at you. You don't want to avoid with super bright colors or patterns, again, just because you don't want to detract. Please be fully dressed. You never know when you may have to stand up. So, I actually do know people it's happened to before. I once actually was doing it was a regular interview, not an informational interview. The guy's dog ran into his room. He had a business suit on and he had boxer shorts on when he went to go get the dog. So it does happen. And if you have glasses, you want to be careful of the glare because the glare can get really distracting. What I will tell you is, I mean, there's nothing you can really do about it other than blue light glasses are worse. So if you wear glasses for just to be able to see better, great, but try to avoid wearing blue light glasses or test it out beforehand. But blue light glasses do tend to give kind of a glare and we can't necessarily see your eyes. Again, not a big deal other than we don't want anything to be to detract from the conversation that we're going to have. And in terms of your location, you're going to have, you know, maybe you're taking notes on a computer or else a pen and a notepad. You need to have your questions in front of you, right? Glass of water, your background neat and tidy. Virtual backgrounds, I'm not a huge fan of. They can work. But when we talk about that distraction factor again, I think you guys probably all know and have all seen it. If you gesture or you move, like sometimes part of you disappears. And that's just awkward if it's like half your hair is gone. So you have to be careful in terms of your background. Ideally, if you can avoid doing it in your bedroom, you want to, simply because, you know, people don't necessarily want to see your bed behind you. If that's the only place you can do it, just make sure everything is neat and tidy. And then alerting anybody else in your house. Because again, it's an informational interview, but if it's an informational interview, either I know you pretty well, but I'm asking good questions, or sometimes I don't know you well. And so that first impression is critical. So just making sure other people know, hey, I'm going to be on a call, please don't come in. Keeping animals out of the room, that type of thing. That informational interview meeting itself, you want to listen really well. This connection that you're making with this person, sometimes if we're doing an informational interview, we might go ahead and we have all our questions and we want to get through them. And on the other end, it kind of becomes the impression of you're just rushing through this and you're not really hearing me. Also, you're not going to get the information you want. You don't want to overstay your welcome. So if we said 20 minutes, I want to make sure I alert you, oh, you know what, it's been 20 minutes. Maybe you have extra time. And so you tell me, okay, you know what, I got a few extra minutes. But maybe you don't. And I don't want it to suddenly be, it's been a half hour and you're late for your next meeting. And really critically, don't turn it into something that it's not. We'll talk about the others in a moment. But what an informational interview is not a time to convince the person that you're talking to across the screen how awesome you are. That's not what this is about, right? You're learning. You also don't want to be trying to get information that you could have gotten somewhere else. Like if you could look up on a website and get the information, those aren't the questions to be asking. It's a waste of both of our times. And it's not something for asking for a job. Keeping in mind, a lot of times informational interviews are just to learn about the industry, maybe to expand your own work, not necessarily looking for a job. So you want to learn information, but you don't want to be asking for anything in an informational interview. It's building your network. And then later on, mutually beneficial if there's things, you know, leads you guys might have for each other, or we talked about like articles, or eventually maybe looking for some sort of career connection. That's going to be later on. Couple other quick things. Anytime you're doing any kind of virtual connecting, log in early. You don't want to be late. You want to be there on time. Let them know if you can't see or hear them well, because it's a waste of your time if you're not really getting, you know, and their time if you're not getting good information from them. And as I mentioned earlier, try to look at the camera lens as much as you can. If you're taking notes, it's going to be harder, but try to when you can. Also during the meeting, be aware when we're connecting with people virtually, there's that delay, right? So it's the Zoom delay. So if I try to talk over you or talk and cut in and you're still talking, we cut each other off. So you just have to be aware of that. Again, keeping your hands, you don't want to be like doing a lot of this. The other thing is you have to notice too, if I gesture with my hands, where am I gesturing with my hands? How big have they become? Right? So try to keep that away. Good thing to do is just kind of keep your feet on the floor, maybe your hands on the armrest. Watch the speed at which you're talking. And when you're listening, you need to be careful, because our normal response when we're talking to somebody is we do verbal affirmations. We'll say things like, uh-huh, oh yeah. But because of that delay thing that I mentioned earlier, then we cut each other off. And so that's no fun. But if I recognize that and I just want to be sitting there and listening, you have no idea if I've frozen or not, right? So you have to kind of make this sort of in-between thing of smiling or maybe a little bit of a head nod without speaking, but not making it think that maybe you may be frozen. Keeping, like I said, your feet on the floor, maybe hands on an armrest, arms on an armrest if you can, or your back straight, kind of keeping your shoulders open, not being hunched over, because then you also get huge, kind of like the hand thing. And then a couple other things when we're networking, closing that meeting, right? So when we go to close the meeting, we always want to, you know, thank the individual, but then, you know, maybe they have someone else that you may want to connect with. So it might be, you know, so what you're talking about is this industry is really fascinating the more I learn about it. I'm curious as to some other companies that you think are really leaders in the industry, and maybe there's, you know, someone else who might be willing to talk with me at those companies, right? Or, you know, the work you do, I know there's nothing available at the WSU Alumni Center right now, but I'm really interested in other organizations as well. Do you know, does everybody only hire from their own alums, or are there some other places that are doing some really cool things? Carrie, is there somebody else you'd recommend I talk to, right? So those closing up the meetings, always see if you can get additional connections. If you aren't already connected on LinkedIn, asking, you know, could we, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn, would that be okay? And then the follow-up. So you do want to follow up with an email telling them thank you for their time. And you also want to follow up later on, again, like we talked about, continuing the relationship and building it. Carrie, I see you have a question, but I'm actually closing, so we can open up to all questions in just a second. So I think kind of overall, to think about the fact that connections are super important, even if we can't always be meeting people in person, but keeping in mind that there's things to think about in terms of the impression that you make when you're connecting virtually, and to not think that it is too hard to connect with people simply because I can't meet with people in person or because people are so tired. People are still really open to making connections. And I'll be honest, in my line of work, for people who are looking to change jobs, most of the individuals that I'm talking to now who are looking for help with resumes and cover letters and things like that are people who are solidly in jobs, but have kind of reestablished their priorities throughout 2020 and are looking to maybe do something different. So continuing to build those connections is going to be super important. Carrie, what questions do you have? What's come through?
Well, one that's come through just now is, what would you recommend if you're in a Zoom call and you kind of end up in an awkward loop of continuing to talk over each other and interrupt each other? I think some people have ran into that and find that it's quite awkward. So do you have any tips for kind of how to navigate out of that?
Yes, and it definitely happens, right? I think you call it as it is, right? So you just be upfront and honest, and you just say, okay, hang on, you know what, I keep talking over you, I apologize, go ahead and finish, right? Or you just, but don't you don't want to keep playing that dance, which definitely happens. It's just more sort of calling it as it is and being able to say, okay, hang on, you know what, I think the delay is too much right here and I keep cutting you off, I really apologize. Blame it on the delay or something like that. So, but don't call it sooner rather than later because it can get really awkward. I agree. Yeah. Do we have any other questions that have come in?
I have a couple that I would love to pose to you. Do you have any tips for us on how to combat Zoom fatigue?
Okay. Yeah. It's super real, right? I will say one thing. I know I said don't wear blue glasses when, if you're doing something where it's really trying to make an impression. But honestly, there's a couple things with Zoom fatigue. One is the fact that our eyes just do get tired. So blue glasses are important. So I actually have a pair, but I'm too vain to wear them when I'm presenting. So pick and choose when you're going to wear them. But blue glasses definitely help in terms of just the physical tiredness. The other thing that we get really tired of, and part of what makes us so exhausted is, even though we don't necessarily realize it, looking at yourself is exhausting because you're constantly reevaluating yourself and how do I look? I'm just going to stop sharing this for a minute so I can just kind of see people. But you do end up really getting worn out from looking at yourself. So you can make it so that you can't see yourself. And that actually does help. If it's hard, if you don't need to have a camera on, most of you don't have a camera on, and that is completely appropriate in this particular situation. There are certain meetings where it's not, but not having a camera on can definitely help with that Zoom fatigue as well. And if you're someone who's job searching and you're networking, pace yourself, right? So when I say we're gonna, let's connect with 5 people a week or 10 people a week, don't make them all informational interviews or meetings. Spread them out between just kind of email connections and other things, and then make sure you have enough time to get up and walk around. Because all of it's real, but I don't see us getting out of it anytime soon. And so I think taking little steps to help yourself along the way can really help. Any other questions?
Yes. So another person was curious if job shadowing is a similar tool or appropriate to build off of the informational interview.
Job shadowing, if you can get a job shadow, it's fantastic. It is an absolutely wonderful way to learn more about a career, if people will let you do that. The other thing I recommend in terms of job shadowing can also be when you're already in a company, especially if you have a managerial role, to shadow your employees Or like for myself, let's say, you know, I'm currently hiring for the fire department and police department. Not right now, but in past years, I go along on ride-alongs because that is building a connection. It's also showing value in terms of what I value their work. And it's important for me to hire people and for me to understand their jobs. But if you're a manager, job shadowing in terms of, again, being able to show how much you value what they do and that you understand what they do. And then if someone will let you job shadow, if you're interested in a career, absolutely. It's just sometimes a little more, it's a little bit harder to do. But if it's somebody you know well, and you know they'll let you shadow for a day, it's a fantastic opportunity. It also helps you learn whether it's something you really want to do. Because sometimes you might shadow somebody and be like, okay, I'm really glad I did that because this is not for me. So it's a great learning tool. Great question. Yeah.
So another person was wondering how the callback process works nowadays, now that in-person interviews aren't happening. If you have any information on that.
The callback process, you mean in terms of
or second interviews or next steps after the initial interview?
Sure. Yeah. And actually that's that's a point I didn't bring up that I probably should. So I'm going to back off that question for 1 second and come right back to it, which is, I do hear people ask if I've tried to reach out to somebody and I'd like to meet with them. How often do I contact them? And I would say you need to give it at least 10 days before you reach out again. And then you can do one more reach out. So if you're looking to contact somebody and then you haven't heard from them, you can reach out within about, 10 days or so. And then if you don't hear from them or they don't want to meet, don't take it personally. People are really busy, but I wouldn't keep contacting them. In terms of the callback process, most companies now are just doing virtual interviews and they're getting really good at it. And so oftentimes, you'll get called in for an interview and then you might get called for another group interview or to meet with somebody else. And then some companies are doing eventual one-on-one, depending on where they're located and what's allowed, eventual in-person meetings. But most companies are sticking to virtual meetings right now. And you'll usually hear back and it's the same kind of thing. If you do an interview and you don't hear anything back, I'd give it a week to 10 days and then you could reach out again. But I wouldn't keep necessarily reaching out. We would hope that everybody would contact back and give you feedback or follow up and say, we're no longer interested. It doesn't always happen, but I think one touch back on your part is perfectly appropriate, but probably not more than that. So I hope that answered the question. If not, you guys are welcome to reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer it if I didn't quite hit that. Anything else? I know we're at our time.
That's everything that's come through in the chat. So I think you hit them all, Kimberly. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. And again, you guys, if anybody does have any questions, you are welcome to reach out to me. It's KCHR Consulting. So like Kimberly Carper. So kchrconsulting@gmail.com. Happy to answer any additional questions that may come up afterwards.
Great, thank you. And thank you everybody for logging on this afternoon. We'll have the recording up later today or first thing tomorrow morning. Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.